Hi guys, Robbie46 here, welcome yourselves back to MotoGP 21 on the Xbox Series X. We're doing a 100% race distance race around Circuit of the Americas in Austin. And yes, the tyre wear and fuel consumption is turned on. So yeah, MotoGP is back in America after obviously not being able to race there last year, obviously. But yeah, there's a lot to get through. There's a hell of a lot to get through. First of all, we're going to start off with a lot of the MotoGP riders are not happy with the condition of the circuit itself. Apparently it is, well, you can visually see from the footage on TV and that the track itself is very, very bumpy, very, very ripply, and it's not really, you know, that safe for bikes anymore. The bumps are in really, really, you know, unsafe places. The bikes themselves are struggling to cope with the bumps, and there's some corners where instead of being leant over, they've basically got to almost sit up. I mean, the corner we're coming up to next, no, not this one, the one after this, turn 10, the riders don't get fully leant over. They have to sit up because it's just so bumpy there that if they fully lean over, they're going to crash. So, yeah, not too bad for the other classes, but the MotoGP bike's obviously a lot heavier, a lot faster, and struggling on the bumps. They've already said if it doesn't get sorted by next year, then they're not going to race there next year. Yeah, but obviously we'll talk more about MotoGP when we get to it a bit later on. Like I said, we've got a lot to talk about, especially in Moto3. Moto3, always a bonkers race, always just, you know, really, really close racing. There has been arguments recently about how unsafe the lower classes have become. With Moto3, you know, the CEV Junior Championships, Moto3 Championship, and World Supersport 300. Obviously, we've unfortunately had 3 fatalities of young riders this year. And yeah, there are a lot of arguments about how to make the lower classes safer. And not only that, to try and get the riders to respect each other a bit more, because in the lower classes they don't seem to respect their opponents as much as they do when, you know, or what they're supposed to when they get to, you know, the higher classes. It seems like they're quite happy to barge people out the way and, you know, get in each other's way and look for a tow in qualifying and that. So yeah, again, we're going to touch on that in a little bit, but yeah, Moto3, Xavi Artigas got a jump start. He was given 2 long lap penalties to do, but to begin with, it was you know, kind of the usual suspects out front. Well, I say the usual suspects, it wasn't really. Izan Gravera was right at the front. He of his teammate Sergio Garcia and the guy who's also fighting for the championship, Garcia, unfortunately ruled out of this race due to an injury. So Guevara by himself on the gas and looking really good all season. Obviously he's a rookie as well. He was battling with the likes of Dennis Foggia, Artigas as well, before Artigas had to take his 2 long lap penalties. Mazia as well, he was having a good weekend. Dennis Onchu was up there. You had Alcoba, Darren Binder, John McPhee as well, who started quite far down but did manage to make his way to the leading group. Pedro Acosta not having the best of weekends. He qualified quite far down. He did eventually manage to get onto the leading group, and he was there or thereabouts. And yeah, there was only one crasher, which the reason we got a lot to talk about with Moto3 is because after 7 laps, the red flag came out. So Philip Salach had quite a nasty crash, basically going over a curb, but kind of going all the way over, so over the curb onto the green, and as his rear wheel came off the curb, it just lost traction and pretty much just high-sided him off. So he had quite a nasty crash. It basically took the wind out of him. He couldn't really move. The doctors obviously got to him as quick as possible, and then they decided to put the red flag out because he was basically in the firing line for the next time that the bikes came round on the next lap. So they red flagged the race, and then they decided, because they'd only done 7 laps, obviously they couldn't call it a result. So they basically reset everyone, and Antonelli, he'd also crashed as well, but he did manage to get back up and did manage to get back to the pit within the 5 minutes allotted time. If you crash and you get back to the pit within 5 minutes, you can take part in the restart. So they basically decided to do a 5-lap dash for the restart. That people would take the grid position that they were in prior to the red flag coming out. And the trouble is, when it's 5 laps or a real short distance, carnage always happens. Yes, they're great to watch, but they're always very hectic races. And it was, well, we're going to talk about. So 5 laps. Basically, they didn't actually end up doing 5 laps. They only done 2 or 3, not many. So again, back at the front, Guevara was there. Some of the other riders as well. Pedro Costa was in the leading group, as was Dennis on Chu, Binder, McPhee. Basically, pretty much the same people that was in the leading group in the first race. However, Guevara, his rear shock went, so he had no rear suspension. It basically broke. So he had to pull into the pit and retire. He was not happy, understandably, and he was throwing chairs and stuff around in the pit box, which obviously he's a rookie, he's a young rider, he's going to be emotional after, potentially, he was on course to take his potentially first win at Grand Prix level. So he wasn't happy. And then, just after a few laps, there was a monster of a crash. And when I say monster of a crash, I mean absolutely huge. It was horrific. So going onto the back straight, so coming out of turn 11, which is a very tight left-hand hairpin, and then they go on to one of the longest straights on the MotoGP calendar. So you had a big group of them. Dennis Onchu was slipstreaming Jeremy Alcoba. He pulled out the slipstream, got alongside, and then pulled back in a bit too soon, and basically took Jeremy Alcoba's front wheel away on the straight. Jeremy Alcoba went down. He had nowhere to go. And then you had Mino and Pedro Costa basically get launched over Dennis Onchu's bike. And if you've seen the footage of it, they get some air. They basically, Jeremy Alcoba's Honda becomes a ramp, and they get some big air and have horrible crashes. And luckily both riders were okay. Pedro Costa did actually hit the Armco barrier down the straight. Luckily both riders okay, but it was an absolutely horrific crash. It could have been really bad. I spoke a little bit earlier about how people are arguing to make the lower classes safer. One of the issues that there is with like Moto 3 is that all the bikes are very, very close mechanically. Obviously you do get some riders which are better than others, and but you do get big groups, which is fantastic for racing. It's fantastic for viewing, but when it goes wrong, it can have dire consequences. We've seen in the past where a rider will go down in a pack, and unfortunately they then get clipped by an unsighted rider behind them, and that is when unfortunately fatalities happen. Luckily that didn't happen. Luckily everyone managed to avoid the crashed riders, but it was horrific, and like I said, it could have been a lot worse if someone had been hit by another bike. We could have potentially lost 2 or 3 young riders in Moto 3, which obviously is not what we want to see. So Dennis Onchu, yeah, obviously he didn't do it on purpose. He obviously thought himself that he'd got past and was fully past. Obviously they got no mirrors on their bikes, so it's not like they can look behind from mirrors and see if they're fully past. Again, Jeremy Alcoba as well, obviously not saying it's his fault, but he could have done a couple of things to avoid it, but obviously he may have not realised what was happening. If he had, obviously he could have just backed off the throttle a little bit or tried to weave to the left a little bit more. But like I said, entirely not his fault. He I don't think he really knew what was going on until it was way too late. And then championship leader down. But like I said, no serious injuries. Dennis Onchu has been suspended for the next 2 races, which I would say is maybe a little bit harsh. I was kind of expecting them to maybe put him up to the back of the grid. Like I said, it wasn't intentional. But I think because of the severity of the actual crash itself, and the fact that they need to do something. They need to make examples of people and prove that stuff like this is not okay. Dennis Onchu was visibly upset in the garage. This was way before he'd been suspended for the next 2 races, so he knew he'd messed up basically, and he was looked very, very upset, which shows that he didn't mean to do it. But they've decided to suspend him for the next 2 races, so he will miss out on the second Misano race, and he will also miss out on Portugal. He will be back for the final race of the season in Valencia. So yeah, no Dennis Onchu for the next 2 races, which, like I said, maybe a bit too harsh, but I guess they really need to start cracking down on this, and maybe this will make some riders think twice before doing something in future. I hope it does anyway. But like I said earlier, they don't seem to respect each other's space very much in the lower class. And I know it's racing, I know they got to get close in that, but they seem they're quite happy, like I said, to barge through on people and stuff like that, which obviously is not ideal. So maybe this is something that Moto3 needs. The potential that something could have horrifically gone wrong. Obviously we lost the young Jason Dupasquier earlier in the season at Mugello when he was hit by another rider after crashing. So yeah, let's hope that this does stop things like this happening again. I mean, on a straight, which is very, very fast, like I said, a very long straight around here, it could have been a lot worse, so I'm just thankful that it wasn't any worse than it actually was. So because of that, they'd literally done about 2 laps, so it wasn't again 2/3 distance, so again they couldn't call it a result. So what they done instead, and as the rule book says, if they don't get to do the 2/3 distance in the second part of the race, they can go back to the first part of the race, or the original race, and they can call results on that and give out full points from that race. So basically, they didn't finish the 5 laps. They didn't even get anywhere near. So they couldn't use the results from that. So they used the results from the first part of the race. And I did see some stupid comments saying, well, that made the second part of the race useless and obviously put people's lives at risk. But we didn't know that crash was going to happen. So those comments are a bit stupid. You know, if that crash hadn't happened, they would have used the 5 laps and used the results from them. So it's just unfortunate that crash happened. So they've gone back to the original results. So, that being said, like I said, Izan Guevara had to retire in the second race. However, because he was leading when the race was stopped in the first part, he got given the win. So his emotions went from being gutted, angry, upset that his bike had broke, to being absolutely ecstatic that he'd now won his first ever Grand Prix race. So it's good for him, because he didn't deserve to have a DNF after being really, really strong in the first race. So I think that's pretty good. So let's go through the results. So there's only one DNF, and that was the rider that caused the first red flag in the first race, which was Philip Salach. So he is the only DNF. But yeah, Guevara took the win. Dennis Foggia took second place. John McPhee was third. Mazia in fourth. Onchu got fifth. Alcoba in sixth. Darren Binder seventh. Acosta got eighth. So obviously he had that horrific crash in the second race. But because he was obviously upright in the first race, he still got some points, as did Alcoba. Suzuki was 9th. Mino was 10th. Nepa in 11th. Fanati 12th. Sasaki was 13th. Artigas was 14th. And Antonelli was 15th and last point scorer. And then you had Fellon in 16th. Koffler 17th. Tate in 18th. 19th was Sura. Ricardo Rossi 20th. Adrian Fernandez, who also had a long lap penalty, was 21st. Yamanaka 22nd. Kaito Toba 23rd. Izdaihar 24th. And Yuki Kuni in 25th. So that was a very, very hectic Moto3 race. And like I said, we had a lot to get through there. But the Moto3 standings now, Foggia has closed in on the points. Yeah, I think it's about 20 points now. So Pedro Acosta on 218. And Dennis Foggia is on 188. So what's that? 30 points he's behind. Sergio Garcia obviously not racing at COTA. He has dropped down to third now. He's on 168. Romano Fenati is in fourth on 138. Mazia in fifth on 135. Darren Binder in sixth on 123. Antonelli seventh on 119. Guevara in eighth on 101. And Sasaki is ninth on 96. So that was Moto 3. Now then, into Moto 2. And it was looking like it was going to be business as usual. The two Red Bull KTMs took off straight away. Remy Gardner leading with Raul Fernandez in second. Fernandez very quickly put a move on Gardner to take the lead. And then Gardner got beaten up a little bit. Cameron Beaubier, we must say as well, he qualified really well. He was on the second row. He led into turn one, but did run wide on the exit. and then dropped back down to third. He did manage to get back into second place momentarily, and he was fighting for podium positions for a little while. You had Digi Antonio up there fighting with him, as well as Marco Bezzecchi. So Bobier, Bezzecchi, Digi and Remy Gardner were all fighting. Digi and Bezzecchi, actually no, it's Digi and Bobier both got past Gardner, and then Gardner did manage to eventually get back past into second place. A bit further down, Sam Lowes did not have the best of qualifiers. He actually crashed on his fastest lap, so yeah, he didn't really get going. He eventually actually retired from the race itself. Jake Dixon a bit further down, he was having a pretty decent weekend. Arbolino as well and Ayagura, they were looking pretty strong as well for the rookies. But back at the front, Raul Fernandez was pushing. He was trying to pull away from the rest of them, and he was doing just that. He was pulling away from his teammate especially. And then we saw a very rare thing from Remy Gardner. He crashed out of the race. He crashed out, so towards the end of the lap, you got that horrible couple of left-handers, and unfortunately for Remy Gardner, he was a little bit wide, and he ended up losing the front and going down. He couldn't get the bike going again, and that was his race done. So a big loss for him in the championship. He had quite a decent advantage over his teammate Raul Fernandez in the championship, but yeah, it wasn't good for him. Raul Fernandez leading the race, so was potentially going to get 25 points and close that gap down by 25 points. A bit further back, you had Thomas Luthi. He had a pretty decent couple of races, but unfortunately COTA was not one of them. He unfortunately crashed out, as did, like we just said, Remy Gardner. Sam Lowes retired. Hector Garzo, he unfortunately went down. Albert Arenas had quite a nasty crash and looked like he'd broken his collarbone. I haven't actually double checked to see what injury he had, but he was holding his collarbone. Marcel Schrotter, he unfortunately was out, and also Vietti. Vietti wasn't doing too bad. I think he was inside the top 10, but unfortunately for him, he crashed out. But back at the front, business as usual in terms of Raul Fernandez just leading the way. There was a fight, like I said, between Bobier, Bezzecchi, Digi Antonio. Digi managed to get ahead of all of them and get into second place and pull away and kind of go into a bit of no man's land, where the gap to Fernandez was over 2 seconds, and the gap behind him was over 1.5 seconds. So Digi was quite comfortable there in second place. Marco Bezzecchi, he managed to come through to third, and again he managed to pull away from the guys behind. Bobier then got caught by Arbolino and Augusto Fernandez. Arbolino couldn't make a way through. He did actually end up making a mistake, which cost him quite a bit of time and put him on the back foot, which then allowed Augusto Fernandez to come through on Arbolino. And Fernandez, or Augusto Fernandez we should say, not Raul Fernandez who was out front, but Augusto Fernandez, his pace towards the end of the race is usually really good, so he then managed to catch Cameron Bobier and pass him. But Bobier was looking really good. It's one of the only tracks he actually knows on the calendar, so it was good to see, his potential. So maybe next season look out for him and see what happens. And then a bit further down, you had Ayagura fighting with Vieje. Marcos Ramirez was pretty high to begin with, but he made a bit of a mistake as well and ran a bit wide and dropped quite a few places. But I think he was in about 6th or 7th place at one point. But it was Raul Fernandez who went on to take the win and a very important 25 points. He's already basically said that the pressure is not on him, it is on his teammate. It's basically Gardner's championship to lose now, which obviously playing a bit of mind games there. But Fernandez did win. Di Antonio took a very good second place, with Marco Bezzecchi completing the podium in third. Augusto Fernandez took a nice fourth place, with Cameron Bobier taking his career best in fifth. Tony Arbolino was sixth, Iogur at seventh, Xavi Vierge in eighth, Marcos Ramirez was in ninth place. Then in 10th you had Jake Dixon, so back in the points for Jake, which is good. Aaron Canet was 11th place, and you had Jorge Navarro in 12th. Simone Corsi 13th. Chantra was 14th, and Bo Ben Snyder, the last point scorer, in 15th. Nagashima, you may remember Nagashima. He was riding for the Red Bull IO squad last season. Won a few races at the beginning of the season that kind of dropped off a cliff for the remainder of the season, and basically didn't have a ride at the end of the year. He is now back, and he got 16th place. Barry Boltus was in 17th. 18th with Joe Roberts. Expected a bit more from Joe. Stefano Manzi 19th. Sirin in 20th. Aldeguer in 21st. And Lorenzo Baldassari was 22nd and the last finisher. So that was Moto2. The championship now with Raul Fernandez now closing down the points from 34, something like that, before the weekend started. It's now down to 9. So yeah, a good 25 points taken out of Remy Gardner's lead. There's only 3 races left. Marco Bezzecchi is in third. He's 65 points behind. Mathematically can still potentially win the championship, but it's not looking likely that he will. It's looking very likely it will be one of the Red Bull KTM guys. Sam Lowe's in fourth. He's 131 points behind. His teammate may end up nabbing that fourth place in the championship, because Augusto Fernandez has now moved up to fifth place in the championship on 131 points. Di Antonio's moved up to 6th on 128. Aaron Canet has dropped 2 places now to 7th on 124. Iogur in 8th on 113. And then Marcel Schrotter in 9th on 84. So that's it. That is it for Moto2. And then over to MotoGP. And we've already discussed or spoken about, you know, the riders not being happy with the state of this circuit with all the bumps and everything. Marc Marquez, obviously he is the king of COTA. The only time he has not won the race was when he had a DNF back in 2019. That was when Rins and Rossi battled it out, with Rins taking the win and Rossi in second place. Marc Marquez, get his name right, was leading when he crashed that year, and he'd been looking strong all weekend. May not have necessarily looked like he had the pace or the race pace in FP4. He qualified on the front row in third, which is the first time this season, I believe, that he's actually been on the front row. And we know how much he likes it around here. It's his sort of track. The bumps didn't really seem to affect him too much. The Hondas seem to be working quite well around here, and they seem to take the bumps probably the best out of all the manufacturers. But yeah, it was definitely going to be an interesting race, and it certainly was that. Straight off the bat, Marquez got to turn 1 in the lead, and that was it. You had Quartararo managed to get through into second place, and the factory Ducatis didn't get the best of starts. They struggled a little bit. Bagnaia didn't get the best of starts, but he did, get inside the top 3, but then kind of drop back a bit. The Suzukis were looking okay as well. They weren't doing too bad. They were looking quite racy, I suppose. Nakagami got a decent start, and yeah, it was looking like Quartararo was able to match Marquez to begin with, but the lap times on the first few laps were a lot lower than expected, or should I say a lot higher. It's basically a lot slower than what they were expecting, considering what they were doing in free practice and qualifying. They weren't really anywhere near those times. So Quartararo was able to kind of keep up with Marquez. He was, I'd say, I don't know, about 0.3 of a second was the gap for a few laps. It was mainly the straight where Quartararo was, losing out, which is what we expected. The Yamaha, by no means the fastest thing in the straight line. The V4s are definitely quicker. And yeah, that's where Quartararo was losing time. Alicia Spargaro, he was not having a good weekend. Unfortunately for him, he had his 5th crash of the weekend. He was one of the riders who was really making his voice known about being concerned about the bumps, including the crash he had in the race. He had crashed 5 times in the weekend. So the Aprilia not really working around here, especially with all those bumps. He qualified really far down as well, to be fair. A very, very poor qualifying from him by his standards. Zarco as well, unfortunately for him, he crashed out. I think that was at turn 1. And yeah, the Frenchman not really having the best of few races at the moment. Yeah, not good for Zarco. So yeah, another DNF for him. A bit further back, you had Nakagami. Like I said, he was making his way through the order, but he did make a bit of a mistake, and he actually crashed pretty early on as well. But it's quite a slow crash, so he did manage to get up and get going again, so not too bad. And he did actually make up a few positions. Didn't actually manage to get back into the points, but from where he was to where he ended up, it wasn't too bad. Mark then decided to start up in the ante, up in the pace at the front, and that is when he did start to pull away from Quartararo. The gap went up to 0.7, then up to 0.8, then it went up to a second, and then it just kept going up and up and up. And did actually get up to over 3 seconds, then over 4 seconds. And Marquez was just in one of those rhythms that he gets into where he wasn't going to make a mistake. He was in the groove, and there was questions about whether his fitness was last, and also the tyres, because pretty much all of the field opted for the soft rear tyre, apart from Jack Miller, who went for the hard rear tyre. And Michelin had already said that the tyres would come into it towards the end of the race. But the softs last, but the hard rear tyre in Miller's Ducati looked like it wasn't really doing the job he was maybe expecting it to. Miller was actually one of the favourites after the first few free practice sessions. He had really good pace, but he didn't put it together in qualifying. He had quite a bad qualifying. We were expecting him to, potentially be on the front row, but he was down in about 8th or something like that. Not as high as anyone was expecting him to be. And then the race didn't really go to plan either. He was top Ducati at one point, but then he started going backwards. He started losing some positions. Jorge Martin had got through. Alex Rins had got through. And then eventually Pecco Bagnaia, despite the fact that he qualified pretty well, he'd gone backwards a little bit off the start, but he started making his way forward. Bagnaia did manage to get himself up to third place, but by that point he was too far behind Fabio to be able to catch him, and he was way too far behind Marquez to be able to catch him. So it wasn't really, the race that Ducati were potentially expecting. It did kind of look like Miller let Bagnaia through, because he did look behind him and also put his hand up and then went wide. So, whether there are team orders going at the moment, because obviously Bagnaia is still within a shot of the championship, as they just see me crash there. That was on the bumps, and the bike just went all over the place, and I couldn't control it, so we went down. Bagnaia still obviously has the potential to win the championship, so if Ducati have said to Miller to help him out, then I'm sure Miller's going to do that. So Bagnaia did get through and did manage to get up to third. Alex Rins then got through as well and managed to make his way into fourth place. Jorge Martin was trying to fight with Alex Rins for a bit, but wasn't quite able to get through. He actually had to do a long lap penalty because he cut part of the section we've just been through. He actually made a mistake. He lost time as well. He lost time from doing it, but they still gave him a long lap penalty. So he lost a few places, but did manage to gain some back. Then the old friends Joan Mir and Jack Miller were together on track again. You may remember that these two have got history this season. All started back in Qatar, where Mir put quite a harsh move on Miller. So Miller done pretty much the same thing back, and they had a couple of collisions back in Qatar. You may remember as well that at the previous race in Mazzano, Mir put a move on the last lap, which sent himself and another rider very, very wide, which then allowed Marquez to come through and take, fourth place back then. So Mir pretty much done exactly the same. I will say that MotoGP wasn't the most exciting of races. It was pretty spread out at the front, but Mir put a harsh move on Miller. So again, towards the end of the lap, where you got the double left-hander before the very long right-hander, Mir just shoved it up the inside of Miller, made contact, which made Miller obviously sit up. They both went wide, and then none other than Ennio Bastianini managed to take advantage of that, because they were both wide. So he managed to come through both of them. So again, on the final lap, Mir has cost himself and another rider 2 places, which is not good. After the race, Miller was having a word with Mir, and it's the championship has gone for Mir. He's not going to regain it, and to be honest, I don't think he's ever going to win the title again. I think he just gets a bit desperate on the last. I know it's the last lap, so they're going to make silly moves, but he's doing it quite often at the moment, which is not good. Brad Binder, top KTM, he was struggling a little bit as well. The KTM's not really working too well around here. They didn't look too bad in practice and qualifying, but in the race they couldn't really do what they needed to. So it was Marc Marquez who went on to take victory, his second of the season. Remember his other one being at Sachsenring. So Sachsenring and COTA, Marc is still king of, despite the fact he's still not fully fit. Fabio Quartararo took a very good and a very impressive second place. The Yamaha doesn't generally go that well around here. I know last time we came here, Rossi got second place and was fighting for victory after Marc had crashed. But yeah, with that long back straight, the Yamaha does suffer. So for Quartararo to get second place, that was good. Very good for his championship. Obviously, ahead of Bagnaia, who got third place. Alex Rins was fourth. Jorge Martin was fifth. Bastianini got a very good sixth place after that collision between Mir and Miller. Mir got seventh and Miller eighth. However, Mir was given a one-place penalty because of that move. So Miller actually got seventh and Mir got eighth. Brad Binder was ninth. And then you had Polo Spargaro in 10th. Miguel Oliveira 11th. Alex Marquez in 12th. Andrea Dovizioso in 13th place, looking, you know, somewhat more like his old self. So in the points for him. Luca Marini was 14th. Marini looking quite a bit better this season. He did manage to get through to Q2 this year as well. And Valentino Rossi got the last point score in 15th place. And you had Ika Lecuona in 16th. Nakagami, after being on the floor and getting back up, got 17th. Danilo Petrucci 18th. And Franco Morbidelli, who is still suffering with his knee at the moment, was 19th place. So that was the race. The championship now, Fabio Quartararo leads Bagnaia in second place by 52 points. Quartararo is on 254. Bagnaia on 202. Mir is in third on 176. He is 78 behind. That's it. He cannot win the title. There's only 75 points left on the table. Jack Miller is up to fourth on 148. Zarco down to fifth now on 141. It's just gone from bad to worse for Zarco. Binder in sixth on 131. Marc Marquez is up 2 places to seventh on 117. Alicia Spargaro down to 8th on 104. And Maverick Vinales, who wasn't racing because of the loss of his cousin in the World Supersport 300 last weekend, decided not to race. So he's in 9th now on 98. Anyway, guys, that is it. Next race will be back at Mazzano. And yes, I will be using Marc Marquez. But that is it from me, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to leave this video a like if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel for more content. I shall see you guys in the next video. Don't forget to stay safe, wash hands, and look after yourselves. See you guys next time. See you.